The stagecoach lurched to a stop with a groan of wood and leather, sending up a cloud of dust that made Laney Arden's eyes water. She gripped the worn handle of her traveling case tighter, steadying herself as the driver called out their arrival at Granite Bluff. Through the settling dust, she could see the rough outline of the mining town sprawled before her like a scar across the landscape. "End of the line, miss," the driver announced, his weathered face appearing at the coach door. His eyes swept over her tall frame with the same mixture of surprise and assessment she'd grown accustomed to during the long journey west. "Watch your step now." Laney ducked her head as she emerged from the coach, her 5'10" frame requiring careful maneuvering through the narrow opening. Her practical brown traveling dress, though wrinkled from days of travel, couldn't disguise her uncommon height or the strength in her shoulders that came from years of hard work. She'd sewn the dress herself, adding extra length to the hem and sleeves, a skill that had served her well in a world that seemed designed for smaller women. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Granite Bluff. The town was exactly as Eldon Voss had described in his letters: busy, growing, full of opportunity. What he hadn't mentioned was the smell, a mixture of horse manure, unwashed bodies, and the acrid smoke from the smelting operations that hung in the air like a permanent fog. Laney retrieved her trunk from the back of the coach, waving off the driver's half-hearted offer of assistance. She'd learned long ago that most men's chivalry evaporated when faced with a woman who could look them in the eye or down at them, as was often the case. "Pardon me," she addressed a passing merchant. "Could you direct me to the Voss Mining Company office?" The man, shorter than her by half a head, craned his neck to meet her gaze. His eyes widened slightly before he collected himself. "Down Main Street, past the Golden Dollar Saloon. Big building with the green sign. Can't miss it." He tipped his hat and hurried on, but not before Laney caught him glancing back over his shoulder. She hefted her trunk and began the walk down Main Street, her back straight despite the weight. The wooden sidewalks were crowded with miners, merchants, and the occasional woman, though none quite as tall as she. Conversations paused as she passed, and she felt the familiar weight of curious stares. In Baltimore, where she'd spent the last 5 years working in a textile factory after her parents' death, her height had been a curiosity. Here, it seemed almost an affront to the rough masculinity of the frontier town. She'd hoped the West might be different, might offer the freedom and acceptance that had eluded her back east. Eldon's letters had painted a picture of a place where hard work mattered more than convention. "A practical woman is worth her weight in gold out here," he'd written in his neat, business-like script. "Beauty fades, but a strong back and willing hands are forever valuable." It hadn't been the most romantic correspondence, but Laney had appreciated his directness. At 26, with no family and few prospects, she'd been practical too. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Security, stability, a home of her own. These were the things that mattered. The Voss Mining Company occupied a 2-story building that stood out among the ramshackle structures surrounding it. Fresh paint gleamed on the window frames, and a brass nameplate beside the door spoke of prosperity and permanence. Laney set down her trunk and smoothed her hair, tucking a few wayward strands back into the simple bun at the nape of her neck. A clerk looked up as she entered, his thin face pinched with the perpetual worry of a man who dealt with numbers all day. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Eldon Voss. I'm Laney Arden." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Ah, yes, Mr. Voss mentioned you might be arriving. One moment, please." He disappeared through a door marked "Private," leaving Laney to study the office. Maps covered the walls, marking claims and mineral deposits. A display case held samples of ore, each carefully labeled. Everything spoke of order, planning, success. "Miss Arden." The voice was exactly as she'd imagined from the letters: controlled, measured, with a hint of the East Coast refinement that set men like Eldon apart from the common miners. He emerged from the inner office, the clerk trailing behind him like a nervous shadow. Eldon Voss was perhaps 40, with steel-gray hair neatly trimmed and a mustache waxed to perfect points. His suit, though dusty at the cuffs, was of fine quality. He was handsome in the way successful men often were well-groomed, confident, aware of their own worth. His eyes, a cold blue, swept over her in frank assessment. "You're taller than I expected," he said without preamble. "You didn't ask my height in your letters, Mr. Voss." A thin smile touched his lips. "No, I suppose I didn't. Well, no matter. You look strong enough, and that's what counts out here." He circled her slowly, like a buyer examining livestock at market. "Good teeth, clear skin. You'll do nicely." The casual inspection made her skin crawl, but Laney held her tongue. She'd expected some awkwardness in their first meeting. After months of letters, the reality of flesh and blood was bound to be different. "I trust your journey was not too arduous?" he asked, returning to face her. "It was long, but I managed well enough." "Good, good. Endurance is important." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "Unfortunately, I'm in the middle of something rather pressing. We've struck a promising new vein, and I need to oversee the expansion of the tunnel. The spring floods delayed us, but now we're racing to extract as much as possible before winter." "I understand. Perhaps we could meet later to discuss—" "The wedding." He waved a dismissive hand. Yes, we'll get to that, but not immediately. I'm afraid this new strike could triple our output. You understand. Business must come first. I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Sutter's boarding house. Respectable place. Clean sheets. We'll have time to become acquainted once this busy period passes." Laney felt something cold settle in her chest. "How long do you anticipate this busy period lasting?" "Oh, a few weeks. Perhaps a month. Hard to say with these things." He was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to return to his work. "The important thing is that you're here now. Safe, settled. That's what you wanted. Wasn't it, security?" "Yes, but I had thought—" "That we'd marry immediately." His laugh was short, devoid of warmth. "My dear Miss Arden, you're no longer in the East. Things move at a different pace here. We have an understanding. You and I, a contract, if you will. The timing is merely a detail." He opened the door. A clear dismissal. "Jenkins will give you directions to the boarding house. I've paid for 2 weeks in advance. That should give us time to prepare properly. I'll send word when I'm available." Laney found herself on the sidewalk again, trunk at her feet. The clerk's hastily scribbled directions clutched in her hand. The afternoon sun seemed harsher now, the smell of the town more oppressive. She'd traveled 2,000 miles for a promise, for security, for a new life. She'd been prepared to give herself her labor, her body, her future to a man she didn't love in exchange for the stability she craved. But standing there in the dust and noise of Granite Bluff, she realized with stunning clarity that she'd already become what she'd feared most, a transaction, a practical arrangement to be scheduled between mining ventures. Her first night, that sacred threshold she'd guarded through years of poverty and loneliness, was just another detail to be addressed when business allowed. She picked up her trunk, squared her shoulders, and began walking toward Mrs. Sutter's boarding house. The promise that had brought her west felt as substantial as the dust swirling in the afternoon wind. But she was here now. There was no going back. As she walked, she didn't notice the man on horseback who'd paused to water his mount at the trough outside the mining office. He'd observed her exit, noted the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she hefted the heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing at all. He'd seen that particular expression before, the look of someone who'd just discovered that promises, like gold, could turn out to be fool's gold when held up to the light. But Laney Arden walked on, unaware of the watching eyes, focused only on finding her way in this rough town that smelled of broken dreams and desperate hopes. She'd come for a promise, not a dream. Perhaps that had been her first mistake. The directions to Mrs. Sutter's boarding house led Laney through the heart of Granite Bluff's commercial district. She navigated around freight wagons and dodged the occasional drunk stumbling out of a saloon, her trunk growing heavier with each step. The afternoon crowd had thickened, and with it came the attention she'd hoped to avoid. "Well, look what we have here," a voice called out as she passed the Silver Strike Saloon. A group of miners lounged against the building's front, still covered in the day's dirt from the mines. "That's a lot of boys." Laney kept walking, eyes fixed ahead. But the men pushed off from the wall and fell into step around her. "Where you headed?" "Tall drink of water." Another miner, this one with tobacco-stained teeth, moved to block her path. "Ain't seen you around before." "Excuse me?" Laney said firmly, attempting to step around him. "Oh, she's got manners." The first one laughed. "Bet you're one of them mail-order brides. Who's the lucky fellow must be a big man to handle all that." More laughter, more bodies pressing closer. Laney set down her trunk and straightened to her full height, which put her eye level with most of them. "I asked you to excuse me." Feisty, too. The tobacco-stained miner reached out as if to touch her arm. "I like a woman with spirit." The crack of leather on wood made everyone freeze. A horse and rider had appeared seemingly from nowhere, the animal's hooves dancing dangerously close to the miner's boots. The rider had used his reins to snap against the saloon's hitching post, creating the whip-like sound. "Afternoon, gentlemen." The voice was calm, quiet even, but it carried an undertone that made the miners step back. "I believe the lady asked to pass." The rider was perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face bronzed by years under the western sun. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, boots that had seen better days. Nothing fancy, nothing that spoke of wealth or position, but he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who belonged in the saddle. "This ain't your business, Riker," the tobacco-stained miner growled. "We're just being friendly." "Look different from where I'm sitting." The cowboy Riker shifted slightly, his hand resting casual-like near his hip. He wasn't threatening, exactly, but the gesture was clear enough. "Why don't you boys head on inside? I heard Murphy's buying rounds for anyone who can beat him at cards." The mention of free drinks worked like magic. The group grumbled but began drifting toward the saloon doors. The tobacco-stained miner lingered longest, shooting a dark look between Riker and Laney before spitting in the dust and following his companions. Once they'd gone, Riker dismounted with fluid grace. He was tall himself, though Laney still had an inch or two on him. Up close, she could see his eyes were gray, the color of sagebrush after rain. "You all right, miss?" "I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Colt Riker." He touched the brim of his hat. "And you're welcome, though you looked like you might have handled them just fine on your own." There was no mockery in his tone, just observation. Laney found herself almost smiling. "Perhaps, but I appreciate the intervention. I'm new to town." "Figured as much. Not many women your height in Granite Bluff, or anywhere else, I imagine." He said it matter-of-factly, without the usual undertone of judgment or curiosity she was used to. "You heading somewhere particular?" Mrs. Sutter's boarding house. I have directions, but—" She gestured vaguely at the confusing sprawl of streets. "You're going the wrong way," he said, not unkindly. "Mrs. Sutter's is on the north side, past the church. This road leads to the mining camps." He considered her trunk. "That looks heavy. I could walk alongside, if you'd like. My horse could carry your trunk easy enough." Laney hesitated. In Baltimore, accepting such help from a stranger would have been scandalous. But this wasn't Baltimore, and she was tired, lost, and grateful for a friendly face. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Riker. Just Colt is fine." He lifted her trunk and secured it behind his saddle with practiced movements. And it's no trouble. I helped repair Mrs. Sutter's roof last winter. She makes the best apple pie in 3 counties as payment. They began walking, Colt leading his horse with loose reins. The animal, a bay gelding with intelligent eyes, seemed content to follow at a leisurely pace. "You come far?" he asked after they'd gone a block in comfortable silence. "Baltimore." He whistled low. "That's a journey. Family or—" He let the question trail off, polite enough not to pry directly. "Business arrangement," Laney said carefully. "With Mr. Voss at the mining company." "Ah." Something flickered across his face, gone before she could identify it. "Eldon Voss. He's successful." "You know him." Everyone knows the mine owners. Colt guided them around a puddle of questionable origin. "I work horses, not rocks. Got a place north of town. Contract with the freight companies and some of the ranches. Keeps me busy enough." They turned a corner, and the character of the neighborhood changed. The buildings were still rough, but neater, with attempts at gardens behind picket fences. A church steeple rose above the roof lines, its whitewash gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "So you raise horses?" "Train them, mostly. Break them for riding, teach them to work cattle or pull wagons. Each one's different. You have to listen, figure out what they need." He glanced at her sideways. "People aren't so different, when you think about it." Laney found herself warming to his quiet manner. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary chatter, didn't seem bothered by her height or her circumstances. He walked beside her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "There," he said finally, pointing to a 2-story house with green shutters and a wraparound porch. "Mrs. Sutter's. She runs a respectable place. No drinking, no gambling, no visitors after 9 o'clock. He untied her trunk and carried it up the porch steps. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a small, bird-like woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Colt Riker," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of fondness and exasperation. "What have you brought me now?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Sutter. This is Miss Arden," Laney supplied. "Laney Arden, Mr. Voss arranged a room." "Oh yes, the bride-to-be." Mrs. Sutter's sharp eyes took in every detail of Laney's appearance, lingered on Colt, then returned to Laney with something like sympathy. "Come in, dear Colt. You can put that trunk in the front room for now." As Colt maneuvered the trunk through the doorway, Mrs. Sutter continued her assessment. "You look tired. Long journey, I expect. I'll show you to your room. And then there's stew if you're hungry. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and filling." "Thank you. That sounds wonderful." Colt reappeared, hat in hand. "I'll be going then. Miss Arden, Mrs. Sutter." He paused at the door, looking back at Laney. "If you need anything, directions, or if those fellows from the saloon give you any more trouble, I'm usually at the Morrison stable on Fridays, selling horses. Just so you know." "I appreciate that, Mr. Colt." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and was gone. Through the window. Laney watched him swing into the saddle with that same effortless grace, speaking a quiet word to his horse before moving off down the street. "That one's different from most." "Mrs." Sutter observed, following her gaze. "Keeps to himself, works hard, treats his horses better than most men treat their wives. Speaking of which," her tone grew businesslike. "Mr. Voss paid for 2 weeks, like he said. Rooms upstairs, second door on the right. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. I don't serve lunch, but there's always bread and preserves in the kitchen. No gentlemen callers in the rooms. As Colt mentioned, though between you and me," her voice dropped conspiratorially, "I'd receive Colt Riker in my parlor any day over some of the so-called respectable men in this town." Laney felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's not like that. He just helped me find my way. Mrs. Sutter's expression suggested she'd heard that before. Well, you get settled. I'll bring up some hot water for washing. You look like you could use a good rest before whatever comes next. As Lainey climbed the stairs, trunk bumping against each step, she wondered what Mrs. Sutter meant by that last comment. But when she opened the door to her room, small but clean, with a window overlooking the street, she was too tired to puzzle it out. She sat on the narrow bed and unlaced her boots, thinking about the strange afternoon. She'd arrived expecting to begin her new life immediately, to step into the role of wife to a successful man. Instead, she'd been dismissed like an inconvenient delivery, harassed by drunken minors, and rescued by a quiet cowboy who looked at her like she was just another person, not a curiosity or a transaction. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains, somewhere in this town. Eldon Voss was examining his gold, calculating profits, planning expansions, and somewhere else, Colt Riker was probably tending to his horses, speaking to them in that same calm voice he'd used with the miners. Lainey had come to Granite Bluff for a promise, not a dream. But as she watched the sky turn colors she'd never seen in Baltimore, orange and pink and purple painted across an endless canvas, she wondered if perhaps she'd been thinking about it all wrong. She'd been willing to trade her first night for security, to parcel out pieces of herself in exchange for safety and stability. But what if there was something else? What if kindness without expectation, respect without transaction was possible even in this rough place? It was a dangerous thought for a practical woman. But as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Lainey Arden allowed herself, just for a moment, to wonder. The knock on her door came just as Lainey finished pinning up her hair. "Hot water, dear." "Mrs." Sutter called out. Lainey opened the door to find her landlady carrying a steaming pitcher, fresh towels draped over her arm. The older woman bustled in, setting everything on the washstand with practiced efficiency. "There now. Nothing like a good wash after traveling. Takes the dust out of your soul as well as off your skin." Mrs. Sutter paused at the door. "Supper's in 20 minutes. Don't be late, my other boarders are prompt. And they'll eat your portion without a second thought." Alone again, Lainey poured water into the basin and began washing away the grime of travel. The face that looked back from the small mirror was the same as always: strong features, clear green eyes, a jaw that some had called masculine. In Baltimore, the other factory girls had tried to teach her tricks to appear more delicate, how to tilt her head down, hunch her shoulders, make herself smaller. She'd never been good at it. The dining room was already half full when she descended. The other boarders, mostly men with 2 older women who appeared to be wives of shopkeepers, looked up at her entrance. Conversation stuttered to a halt as they took in her height, then resumed in lower tones. "Mrs." Sutter appeared from the kitchen carrying a pot of stew. "Miss Arden, you can sit there, next to Mrs. Henshaw. Martha, this is Miss Lainey Arden, newly arrived from Baltimore." Mrs. Henshaw, a plump woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly. "Welcome. Dear, it's nice to have another woman at table. These men forget their manners without us to remind them." The meal was simple but satisfying: beef stew thick with vegetables, cornbread still warm from the oven, and preserved peaches for dessert. Lainey found herself hungrier than she'd realized. The home-cooked food a comfort after days of stage-stop meals. "You're Mr. Voss's intended, aren't you?" Mrs. Henshaw asked, passing the butter. "He mentioned he was expecting a bride." "Yes, we've been corresponding." "Corresponding?" One of the men, a clerk, by his ink-stained fingers, snorted. "That's what they're calling it now." "Milton!" Mrs. Henshaw scolded, but he continued. "Come now, we all know how it works. Rich man needs a wife, sends east for one willing to trade her." He caught Mrs. Sutter's glare and changed course. "Well, willing to come west. Nothing wrong with it. I suppose. Practical. Lainey set down her spoon carefully. Yes, it is practical, on both sides. Don't mind Milton, Mrs. Henshaw said quietly. He proposed to 3 different girls back in Ohio and got turned down by all of them. Makes him bitter about romance. After supper, Lainey helped clear the table despite Mrs. Sutter's protests. In the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. The older woman spoke without looking at her. I've run this boarding house for 15 years. Seen a lot of women come through, looking for a new start. Some find what they're looking for. Some find something better. And some... She handed Lainey a plate to dry. Some find that what glitters isn't always gold. I'm not looking for gold. Mrs. Sutter, just stability. Are you now? The landlady's hands stilled in the soapy water. Let me tell you something. Child, I was married once. Good man. Everyone said, successful merchant. I was 17, grateful to be chosen. He wasn't cruel, exactly, just absent. Treated me like another piece of furniture in his well-appointed house. When he died of fever 5 years later, I thought I'd mourn. Instead, I felt like I could breathe for the first time. She resumed washing, her movements deliberate. I took his life insurance money and came west. Bought this house, made my own way. It's hard work, but it's mine. Every board, every nail, every decision mine. That's admirable, Lainey said softly. It's freedom. Mrs. Sutter corrected. Something to think about. They finished the dishes in companionable silence. As Lainey turned to leave, Mrs. Sutter spoke again. That Colt Riker who brought you here, he's different from most. Helped me patch this roof in the middle of winter. Wouldn't take a penny for it. Just asked for meals when he was in town. Man who values a hot meal over money that tells you something. Back in her room, Lainey unpacked her few belongings. 3 dresses, all practical, all sewn by her own hands. Her mother's Bible. A daguerreotype of her parents, taken the year before they died. Her sewing kit, the one thing of real value she owned, with its fine steel needles and scissors, carefully maintained. She hung her dresses on the pegs provided and placed the Bible on the small bedside table. The daguerreotype she propped on the dresser. Her parents' serious faces gazing out at this new place they'd never imagined their daughter would go. The sewing kit she held in her lap, running her fingers over the worn leather case. Her mother had taught her to sew, to take pride in straight seams and invisible mends. A woman who can make and mend will never go hungry, she'd said. In the factory, Lainey had been one of the fastest seamstresses, her long fingers surprisingly nimble despite their size. A burst of laughter from the street drew her to the window. Below, she could see the town settling into evening, merchants closing shops, saloon lights growing brighter, the rhythm of a frontier town transitioning from day work to night pleasures. Tomorrow, she supposed, she should explore the town properly, find out where the general store was, the church, the other respectable establishments a woman could frequent. She should begin preparing for her role as Mrs. Eldon Voss, whenever he deemed the timing appropriate. But tonight, in this small, clean room that smelled of lavender water and beeswax, she allowed herself to just be Lainey Arden, not a bride-to-be, not a transaction waiting to be completed, not the too tall spinster she'd been becoming in Baltimore, just a woman who'd traveled far, seeking something she couldn't quite name. The next morning brought a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and curious looks from the boarders who'd missed supper the night before. Lainey ate steadily, ignoring the whispered conversations. After breakfast, she ventured out to explore Granite Bluff properly. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. She found the general store, where the proprietor's wife gave her a thorough looking over before grudgingly providing directions to other shops. At the dry goods store, she lingered over bolts of fabric, calculating costs in her head. She had a small amount saved, but it would need to last until whatever arrangement she and Eldon finally came to. The blue would suit you. Laney turned to find Colt Riker standing near the door. Hat in hand, he looked freshly washed, his dark hair damp at the edges. Mr. Riker, I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "Friday," he reminded her with a slight smile. "I'm usually at Morrison's stable. Just finished up." He moved closer, studying the fabric she'd been touching. "The blue brings out your eyes. My mother always said to choose colors that made you happy to wear them." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." The past tense carried weight. "Been gone 10 years now, but I still hear her voice sometimes, usually when I'm about to do something foolish." They stood quietly for a moment, surrounded by bolts of calico and gingham. It should have been awkward, an unmarried woman and man, barely acquainted, making small talk in a shop. But something about Colt's presence was restful, undemanding. "I should go," Laney said finally. "I don't want to keep you." "I'm in no rush, but I was wondering." He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as uncertainty. "Mrs. Sutter mentioned you're handy with a needle. That true?" "I worked in a textile factory. Sewing's what I know best." "Thing is, I've got a shirt that's more holes than cloth. Been meaning to replace it, but it's comfortable, broken in just right. Don't suppose you'd take a mending job. I'd pay fair wages." Laney considered. It wasn't quite proper, perhaps, but money was money. "I'd need to see it first, assess the work needed." "Of course, I could bring it by Mrs. Sutter's. Leave it with her if you're not around." "That would be acceptable." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head. "I'll do that then. Good day, Miss Arden." After he left, Laney purchased a small amount of thread, practical colors. Nothing fancy. The shop owner's wife watched the transaction with sharp eyes. "That Colt Riker," she said as she wrapped the thread in brown paper. "He's not spoken for, though plenty have tried." "I'm engaged to Mr. Voss," Laney reminded her. The woman's expression suggested what she thought of that, but she said nothing more. That evening, true to his word, Colt's shirt appeared, left with Mrs. Sutter in a clean flour sack. Laney examined it in her room, holding it up to the lamplight. It was indeed more repairs than original fabric, but quality cloth underneath, the kind of shirt a man wore for work, comfortable and familiar. She could see where other hands had mended it, some skillfully, others less so. A mother's careful darning, perhaps. Later attempts that spoke of bachelor necessity rather than skill. Each repair told a story, a history written in thread. Laney spread the shirt on her small table and opened her sewing kit as she selected needle and thread, matching the color to the faded blue cloth. She felt something settle in her chest. This was familiar territory. Not the uncertainty of her position with Eldon, not the strange navigation of being a woman alone in a rough town. Just needle and thread and cloth. The satisfaction of making something whole again. She worked until the lamplight grew too dim, then carefully folded the shirt and set it aside. Tomorrow she'd finish it, return it to Colt properly mended. It was a small thing, this bit of sewing for wages, but sitting in her narrow bed, listening to the night sounds of Granite Bluff through her window, Laney felt more herself than she had since leaving Baltimore. Mrs. Sutter had talked about freedom. Laney hadn't understood then, but now, with her sewing kit beside her and honest work waiting for tomorrow, she began to grasp the edges of it. Not the grand freedom of choosing her own destiny, she was too practical to believe in that, but the small freedom of useful work, of skills that had value beyond what a man might assign to her. She thought of Eldon, presumably still at his mine, counting profits. Thought of Colt, somewhere in the darkness, tending to horses with patient hands. Thought of herself, suspended between what she'd expected and what might yet be. The room was quiet, clean, hers for now. Tomorrow would bring what it brought, but tonight, Laney Arden felt something she hadn't expected to find in Granite Bluff, the faint stirring of possibility. 3 days passed before Eldon Voss appeared at Mrs. Sutter's boarding house. Laney was in the parlor, working on the hem of one of her dresses when she heard his voice in the hallway, authoritative, slightly impatient, asking after Miss Arden. She set aside her sewing and stood as he entered, noting how he filled the doorway with his presence rather than his physical size. He carried a large box, which he set on the side table with a flourish. "Laney," he said her name like he was testing its weight. "You look well rested. Good. The mountain air agrees with you." "Mr. Voss, I wasn't expecting you today." "I had a free hour. Thought we should discuss arrangements." He gestured to the box. "And I brought you something. A woman in your position needs to look the part." Laney approached the box cautiously. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a dress of deep red velvet, trimmed with black lace. Even without touching it, she could tell it was expensive, the kind of dress worn by women in San Francisco's finer establishments. The neckline plunged lower than anything she'd ever worn, and the waist was narrow, designed to be worn with stays tighter than any working woman could bear. "It's very fine," she managed. "Had it brought from Sacramento. Cost a pretty penny, but you're tall enough to carry it off. Most women would be lost in all that fabric." He circled her again, that same appraising look from their first meeting. "You'll wear it when I introduce you to my associates. And of course, for our first evening together." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Laney's fingers tightened on the box edge. "When might that be?" "Soon. The new vein is proving even richer than expected. Another week, perhaps 2, and I'll have time for personal matters." He reached out and lifted her chin with one finger, studying her face. "You understand what's expected, don't you? I've been very generous, the room, the dress, the promise of security. I expect reciprocation." "I understood our arrangement from your letters," Laney said, stepping back from his touch. "Marriage in exchange for—" Yes, marriage. Eventually. But a man likes to know what he's getting. Doesn't he think of it as earnest money, a deposit on our future together?" His smile was cold. "The dress should help you feel more amenable. You frontier women can be rather rigid in your notions of propriety." The front door opened, and Mrs. Sutter's voice carried from the hall. "Oh, Colt, good timing. I have Miss Arden's mending work right here." Eldon's expression shifted, hardening at the edges. "Who is Colt?" Before Laney could answer, Mrs. Sutter appeared in the doorway, Colt behind her. The cowboy took in the scene, Eldon standing too close to Laney, the elaborate dress spilling from its box, the tension in the air, and his gray eyes darkened. "Mr. Voss," he said evenly. "Miss Arden." "Riker." Eldon's voice carried the particular disdain of a man who measured worth in bank accounts. "What business do you have here?" "Collecting a shirt Miss Arden was kind enough to mend." Colt's gaze moved to Laney. "If it's ready." "Yes, I'll fetch it." Laney escaped gratefully. Hurrying upstairs, behind her, she heard Eldon's voice, low and threatening. "Stay away from my property, Riker." "Didn't know Miss Arden was property," Colt responded mildly. "Thought the days of buying and selling people were past." Laney returned quickly, the mended shirt wrapped in brown paper. The two men stood facing each other like bulls in a pasture, Mrs. Sutter watching with sharp eyes from the doorway. "Here you are," Laney said, handing the package to Colt. "The left sleeve was particularly worn, but I've reinforced it." Colt took the package, his fingers brushing hers briefly. From his pocket, he produced a silver dollar. "For your work." "That's too much." "Fair wages for fine work." He glanced at the red dress, then back to her face. "A person should always be valued for what they can do, not what others want them to be." Eldon stepped between them. "Your business is concluded." Riker, move along. Colt held Laney's gaze for another moment. If you need more work, Miss Arden, Mrs. Morrison at the general store mentioned she could use a seamstress. Respectable employment. He touched his hat brim. Good day. After he left, Eldon turned on Laney. You're taking in mending like some common washerwoman. I need occupation. Mr. Voss, you've been busy. I've been working to secure our future. I won't have my wife-to-be earning pennies like a servant. I'm not your wife yet, Laney said quietly, and a woman needs purpose beyond waiting. His face flushed. You need to remember your place. I've invested considerably in you. The room rent and address I didn't ask for. Your passage west, for starters. The promise of a comfortable life. Do you have any idea how many women would trade positions with you? He grabbed the red dress, shaking it at her. This dress costs more than most miners see in a month. It's yours if you show proper gratitude. Mrs. Sutter cleared her throat from the doorway. I'm afraid I need the parlor for the evening Bible reading. Mr. Voss, perhaps you could continue this discussion another time. Eldon shoved the dress back in the box. Think about what I've said. Laney, think about what you want, comfort and security, or... He glanced toward the door where Colt had exited. Well, there's not much future in mending shirts. Is there? He left in a swirl of importance and cologne, the box abandoned on the table. Mrs. Sutter and Laney stood in silence for a moment. Well, the older woman finally said, that's a very red dress. Despite everything, Laney laughed a short, surprised sound. Yes, it is. Come help me set up chairs for Bible reading. Unless you'd like to try it on. I think I'll leave it in the box for now. They arranged chairs in a circle, other boarders beginning to filter in, but Mrs. Sutter caught Laney's arm before they joined the others. That $1 Colt gave you, it's about 3 times the going rate for mending work. She smiled slightly. Just thought you should know. That night, Laney sat by her window, the red dress spread across her bed like an accusation. She'd tried it on once, alone in her room, and seen herself transformed in the mirror. The woman who looked back was striking, even beautiful in a bold, dangerous way. But she wasn't Laney Arden. She folded the dress carefully, placed it back in its box, and slid it under the bed. Then she took out paper and pen, thinking to write Eldon a note, to clarify their arrangement, to establish boundaries. But what could she say? She'd known what she was agreeing to when she'd answered his advertisement. A transaction, clear and simple, her body, her future. In exchange for security, the fact that he wanted to sample the goods before finalizing the deal shouldn't surprise her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Laney, Mrs. Sutter's voice. You have a visitor in the kitchen. Confused visiting hours were long over. Laney made her way downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Colt sitting at the scarred wooden table, a cup of coffee before him. I'm sorry to come so late, he said, standing as she entered. But I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? He studied her face in the lamplight. That scene earlier, Voss can be aggressive when he wants something. He's my intended. He has certain expectations. Does he? Colt's voice was carefully neutral. And do those expectations include you being happy? The question caught her off guard. Happiness isn't part of the bargain. Maybe it should be. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded paper. This is from Mrs. Morrison. She'd like to meet with you tomorrow about sewing work, if you're interested. Regular work, good pay. She supplies several of the mining camps with mended clothes. Laney took the paper, seeing an address and time written in neat script. Why are you doing this? Colt was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in its saucer. My mother came west as a mail-order bride. Man who sent for her turned out different than his letters suggested. Meaner. She stayed because she didn't think she had choices. He looked up at her. Took her 5 years to learn otherwise. 5 years of bruises and broken promises before she took my sister and me and ran. Eldon, hasn't he wouldn't? Maybe not with his fists, but there's more than one way to break a person's spirit. He stood, setting his hat back on his head. You're stronger than my mother was. I saw that the first day, but strength shouldn't be the only thing standing between a woman and misery. He paused at the door. That dress he brought you, it's meant to make you into something you're not, but you're already something. Lainey Arden. Don't let anyone tell you different. After he left, Lainey stood in the quiet kitchen, the note clutched in her hand. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the clear mountain sky. Somewhere in town, Eldon was probably calculating his profits, planning his empire, expecting her to play the role he'd assigned. But tomorrow, she would meet Mrs. Morrison. She would see about honest work that used her skills, that valued what she could do rather than what she could provide. It wasn't a rejection of Eldon, not exactly, just options. She thought of Colt's mother, trapped for 5 years, thought of Mrs. Sutter, finding freedom after her husband's death, thought of the red dress hidden under her bed, waiting to transform her into someone else's vision. One person who really cares, Colt had said earlier, when she'd first seen the dress, wouldn't need you to display yourself like merchandise. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen as Lainey turned out the lamp and made her way upstairs. In her room, she pulled the dress box from under the bed one more time. The velvet seemed to absorb the moonlight, rich and dark as blood. Beautiful, in its way, expensive, certainly, but looking at it, all Lainey could see was the price tag not in dollars, but in dignity, the cost of becoming what Eldon Voss wanted to purchase. She closed the box and pushed it back under the bed. Tomorrow, she would see about the sewing work. Tomorrow, she would take one small step toward, not freedom exactly, but choice. And that, Lainey thought as she prepared for bed, might be worth more than all the red velvet in Sacramento. The morning sun slanted through the general store windows as Lainey entered. The bell above the door announcing her arrival. Mrs. Morrison looked up from her ledger, a measuring tape draped around her neck like a scarf. Miss Arden Colt said you might come by. The woman was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair and hands that spoke of years of hard work. I've been desperate for skilled help. These miners are death on clothing tears, burns, you name it. She led Lainey to a back room filled with piles of damaged garments. Can't get most of them to buy new when the old can be mended. Practical folk, miners. What they want is sturdy repairs that'll hold up to hard work. Lainey examined several pieces, noting the various damages. I can do this. What's your rate? 2 cents per simple mend, 5 for major repairs, 10 for anything requiring reconstruction. You provide quality work. There'll be plenty of it. Some weeks I've got more than I can handle alone. They shook hands, and Mrs. Morrison handed her a bundle of shirts and trousers. Start with these, bring them back Thursday, and we'll see how we suit each other. Walking back to the boarding house, arms full of mending. Lainey felt lighter than she had in days. This was real work, honest work, not charity or favors, but skill exchanged for wages. She'd barely settled in her room with needle and thread when Mrs. Sutter knocked. That Mr. Voss is here again. Says it's urgent. Lainey found Eldon pacing the parlor, his face thunderous. What's this I hear about you taking in work from Morrison's? News travels fast in Granite Bluff. Answer me. He stopped pacing, fixing her with a cold stare. I won't have my future wife working like a common seamstress. Then perhaps you should have married me when I arrived. As planned. The words came out sharper than intended. Eldon's face darkened. You forget yourself. I've been patient, generous even, but my patience has limits. He moved closer, backing her against the wall. I think it's time we came to an understanding. Tonight, wear the dress I bought you. We'll have dinner at the hotel. And then, no. The word hung between them like a slap. Eldon blinked, as if he couldn't quite process what he'd heard. I beg your pardon. I said no. Lainey straightened to her full height, looking down at him. I came here to be your wife, not your mistress. If you're not ready for marriage, then I'll support myself until you are. Support yourself, he laughed, ugly and sharp. You think a few pennies from mending will keep you alive out here? You have no idea what this town is really like, without my protection. I'll manage. Will you? He grabbed the red dress box from where it still sat on the side table, thrusting it at her. Take it back then. Return it to the shop. See how far pride gets you when winter comes and you can't afford coal for your stove. Lainey took the box with steady hands. I'll return it today. You stupid woman. His voice dropped to a hiss. Do you know how many girls would gladly accept my offer? You're 26, past your prime, too tall, too plain. You should be grateful. Perhaps, but I'm not. She moved toward the door, holding it open. Good day, Mr. Voss. He stared at her for a long moment, color rising in his face. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, darning socks for pennies. Remember this moment. Remember when you could have had everything. After he stormed out, Lainey sank into the nearest chair, the dress box heavy in her lap. Mrs. Sutter appeared with remarkable speed, carrying a tea tray. Heard raised voices, she said mildly, pouring 2 cups. Thought you might need this. I've just refused Mr. Voss definitively. So I gathered. The whole house gathered. I'd wager. She handed Lainey a cup. What will you do now? Work, save money, find my own way. The words sounded braver than she felt. Good, Mrs. Sutter smiled. Now, about that dress. The dressmaker's shop is on 2nd Street. Mrs. Paulson. Tell her I sent you. She'll give you fair value for the return. That afternoon, Lainey made her way to the dress shop, the box awkward in her arms. Mrs. Paulson, a thin woman with sharp eyes, examined the dress critically. Never worn, tag still on. Mr. Voss has expensive taste. She glanced at Lainey knowingly. I can give you $20 store credit or $15 cash. Cash, please. As Mrs. Paulson counted out the bills, the shop door chimed. Lainey turned to see Colt entering, looking out of place among the feminine fripperies. Ladies, he touched his hat brim. Mrs. Paulson, I'm here about that shirt you ordered. In the back, wrapped and ready. The dressmaker disappeared into her storeroom. Colt moved closer to Lainey, noting the empty box and the money in her hand. Returning gifts. Establishing independence. A small smile tugged at his mouth. How's that feel? Terrifying, she admitted, but also free. Freedom usually is both. He studied her face. Voss won't take this well. He's already made that clear. Mrs. Paulson returned with a wrapped package after Colt paid and they left the shop together. He walked beside her quietly for a block before speaking. There's a barn dance Saturday night. Nothing fancy, just neighbors getting together, music, food, dancing. He cleared his throat. Would you like to go as friends? He added quickly. Might be good to meet more folks. Expand your connections beyond Voss's circle. Lainey considered. A public appearance so soon after rejecting Eldon would certainly cause talk. But then, everything caused talk in a town this size. I'd like that, thank you. They'd reached the boarding house. As Lainey climbed the porch steps, Colt called after her. Lainey, that look on your face when you said free. Hold on to that. It's worth more than any rich man's promises. Inside, Lainey found her room transformed. Mrs. Sutter had set up a proper sewing station, a better chair, a table positioned to catch the best light. even a small basket for scraps. "Can't have you hunched over on that bed, ruining your back," the landlady said gruffly. "Bad for business. This is temporary. Mine just until you can afford your own setup." Laney's throat tightened. "Mrs. Sutter, thank you." "None of that now. Just remember us when you're Granite Bluff's finest seamstress." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Myrna Henshaw wants to know if you do alterations. She's got a dress that needs taking in." Word spread with the peculiar efficiency of small-town gossip. By evening, 3 more women had inquired about sewing work. Laney sat at her new table, surrounded by mending, and felt the strange lightness of possibility. She worked until her fingers ached, the repetitive motion of the needle through cloth soothing as meditation. This was what she knew, what she was good at. Each perfect seam, each invisible mend, was proof that she had value beyond what a man might assign to her. As she worked, she thought about Eldon's threats. He was right about winter, about the hardships of a woman alone in a mining town. The $15 from the dress wouldn't last long, but sitting there, creating neat stitches by lamplight, Laney felt more herself than she had since stepping off that stagecoach. She'd come west for security, willing to trade away pieces of herself for the promise of safety. Now, with calloused fingers and tired eyes, she was choosing uncertainty instead. It should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Sutter. But it was Milton, the bitter clerk from dinner that first night. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a coat with a torn lining. "Mrs. Sutter said you might." He gestured at the coat. "I'm no good with a needle, and it's my only warm coat." "Of course. I can have it ready by tomorrow evening." He handed it over, then lingered. "I owe you an apology. What I said that first night about mail-order brides. It was cruel." "It was honest, from your perspective. Maybe. But watching you stand up to Voss today, well, it takes backbone to choose hard work over easy money. Not many would." He shifted uncomfortably. "My mother was a seamstress, raised 3 boys alone after my father died. I should have remembered that before I spoke." After he left, Laney added his coat to her pile. Outside her window, Granite Bluff settled into evening. Somewhere, Eldon Voss was probably fuming, planning his next move. But here, in this small room that smelled of lavender water and clean cotton, Laney Arden was building something of her own. Thread by thread, seam by seam, choice by choice. The dress had been meant to transform her into what Eldon wanted. Instead, returning it had transformed her into what she wanted: a woman who earned her own way, who stood on her own feet, who looked forward to a barn dance with a quiet cowboy who saw her as a person, not a purchase. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd answered that advertisement in Baltimore. It was harder, uncertain, fraught with challenges she couldn't yet see. But threading her needle for another seam, Laney smiled. It was hers. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the mountains look closer than they were. Laney had spent the morning finishing her mending work, pleased with the growing stack of completed garments. Mrs. Morrison had been impressed with Thursday's delivery and immediately provided more work. "You've got the finest hand I've seen west of Chicago," she'd said, counting out payment. "Keep this up, and I'll have to hire you proper." Now, preparing for the barn dance, Laney faced a different challenge. She stood before her meager wardrobe, debating. The brown traveling dress was too worn, the black too severe. That left her blue calico simple but well made, with tiny flowers she'd embroidered along the collar during quiet evenings in Baltimore. A knock interrupted her deliberation. "Laney, dear," Mrs. Sutter entered carrying something cream-colored over her arm. "I thought you might borrow this shawl. The nights are getting cold, and it brings out the color in your cheeks." The shawl was beautiful soft wool with delicate fringe. Lainey wrapped it around her shoulders, surprised by how it transformed the simple dress. Perfect, Mrs. Sutter adjusted the drape with practiced hands. Now, let me fix your hair. Can't have you going to your first dance looking like you've been bent over mending all day. As the older woman worked, creating a softer style than Lainey usually managed, she talked quietly. People will whisper tonight about you and Voss, about Colt escorting you. That's the way of small towns. I know. Do you? Because there's knowing and there's living through it. Margot Voss, that's Eldon's sister-in-law, she'll be there. Woman has a tongue sharp enough to skin a buffalo. I can handle whispers. I believe you can, Mrs. Sutter secured the last pin. There, you look lovely, tall and proud. Like you should be. The barn dance was held at the Hendricks Ranch, just outside town. Colt arrived promptly at 7, driving a small buggy. He'd made an effort too clean-shaven, wearing what was clearly his best shirt, the one Lainey had mended now properly pressed. You look beautiful, he said simply, helping her into the buggy. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. He smiled, that quiet expression that transformed his weathered face. Ma always said a man should make an effort when escorting a lady. The drive was peaceful, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They talked easily about horses, about sewing, about the changing seasons. Colt had a way of listening that made conversation feel natural, unhurried. The Hendricks barn was already crowded when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the assembled crowd. Tables along one wall groaned under the weight of potluck dishes, everything from cornbread to apple pie. A small band had set up in the corner, tuning fiddles and testing the accordion. Heads turned as they entered. Lainey felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispers start, but Colt's steady presence beside her made it bearable. Let me introduce you to some folks, he said, guiding her toward a group near the food tables. The next half hour was a blur of names and faces. Most were welcoming enough ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, even some of the more respectable miners. But Lainey noticed the divisions too. The women associated with the mining company stood apart, and their looks were less friendly. That's her, she heard one woman say, not bothering to lower her voice. The one who turned down Eldon Voss, probably holding out for more money. Or playing him against the horse trainer. Another responded, though what Colt Riker could offer compared to Eldon? Lainey's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high. Let them talk. She knew the truth of her choices. The music started, lively and bright. Couples moved onto the dance floor, and Lainey watched wistfully. She'd learned to dance years ago, but rarely had the opportunity. Most men were intimidated by a partner who could look them in the eye. Would you honor me? Colt stood before her, hand extended. I'm quite tall, she warned. I noticed. His eyes crinkled with humor. I'm not afraid of heights. He led her onto the floor with the same quiet confidence he showed with horses. And miracle of miracles, they fit. He was tall enough that she didn't have to stoop, strong enough to guide her without making her feel clumsy. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years. You're good at this, she said, surprised. Ranch work teaches rhythm. When to push, when to yield. Dancing's not so different. He spun her gently, bringing her back close. Neither is life, when you think about it. They danced 3 songs straight, lost in the movement and music. Lainey felt something loosening in her chest, a tightness she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. When was the last time she'd simply enjoyed herself, without calculating cost or consequence? The music paused for the musicians to rest, and Colt led her toward the refreshment table. That's when Lainey saw her an elegant woman in burgundy silk, blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the barn setting. She stood with a group of mining company wives, but her cold blue eyes were fixed on Lainey. Margot Voss. Colt murmured. Eldon's brother's widow. The woman approached with the deliberate stride of someone used to being noticed. Miss Arden, isn't it the seamstress? Yes, and you are? Mrs. Theodore Voss. She emphasized the Mrs. I understand you've been causing quite a stir in our little town. I've been working and minding my own business. Have you? Margot's smile was sharp as glass. Because from where I stand, you've been playing games with my brother-in-law, accepting his gifts, his protection, then throwing it back in his face for what pride? Integrity, Laney corrected quietly. Integrity. Margot laughed, a tinkling sound devoid of warmth. How noble. Tell me, will integrity keep you warm this winter? Will it put food on your table when the mind controls most of the commerce in town? Colt stepped closer to Laney. Mrs. Voss, I don't think... I wasn't addressing you, Mr. Riker. Her eyes never left Laney's face. Though I suppose I should thank you for showing your true colors. Miss Arden, Eldon deserves better than a woman who'd throw him over for a horse trainer. That's enough. Laney's voice carried the steel she'd learned in Baltimore factories. Mr. Voss offered me a business arrangement. I declined. That's all there is to it. Is it because Eldon tells a different story? About promises made, expectations set? She moved closer, lowering her voice. You cost him considerable embarrassment. That's not forgotten easily in a town this size. Then perhaps he should be more careful with his assumptions. Margot's face flushed. You stupid girl. You have no idea what you've done. The Voss family owns half this town, the stores, the freight lines, even some of the boarding houses. Where exactly do you think you'll be welcome once word spreads? Anywhere that values honest work over threats. Laney replied. For a moment, Margot looked genuinely surprised. Then her expression hardened. We'll see about that. She swept away, silk skirts rustling around them. Laney noticed the crowd had thinned, people suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. The division was clear, those aligned with the mining company on one side, everyone else on the other. We should go, Colt said quietly. No. Laney straightened her spine. I came to dance, and I'm going to dance. And she did. When the music resumed, she danced with Rancher Hendricks, who complimented her on the shirt she'd mended for him. She danced with the schoolteacher, Mr. Palmer, who asked if she might teach some of the older girls to sew. She even danced with Milton, the clerk, who apologized again for his earlier rudeness and proved surprisingly graceful. But it was the last dance with Colt that she knew she'd remember. The band played something slower, sweeter. He held her like something precious but not fragile, and they moved together in perfect time. Thank you, she said as the music ended. For tonight, for not letting me hide. You're not the hiding type. Laney Arden. His hand lingered on hers for just a moment. Never were. I think just took you a while to remember it. The ride home was quieter, both lost in thought. As they neared the boarding house, Colt spoke carefully. What Margot said about the Voss family's reach, it's not all bluster. They do control a lot of the business in town. Are you trying to frighten me? No, just want you prepared. Standing on principle is admirable, but it can be lonely. I've been lonely before, Laney said. At least now I'm lonely on my own terms. He pulled up in front of the boarding house, coming around to help her down. As her feet touched the ground, he kept hold of her hand. You're not alone, you know, Mrs. Morrison respects skill over politics. The ranchers care more about good work than mining money. And... He paused, seeming to choose his words. You've got friends, people who see your worth beyond what others want to buy or sell. Including you. Especially me. They stood there in the moonlight, hands still clasped. Laney felt something shift between them. Subtle but undeniable. Not the desperate grasping she'd seen in Eldon's eyes, but something patient, respectful. Real. "Good night, Colt," she said softly. "Good night, Laney. Sweet dreams." Inside, she found Mrs. Sutter waiting with hot tea and knowing eyes. "How was it?" "Complicated," Laney admitted. "Margot Voss made sure everyone knows I'm an enemy of the mining company now. And I danced anyway. I made connections anyway. She paused, thinking of Colt's hand in hers, of the way he'd looked at her like she was already complete. "I remembered who I am." "Mrs. Sutter smiled. "Good. That's the woman I was hoping to see. Now, drink your tea and get some rest. Tomorrow's Sunday, but Monday the real work begins. If you're going to take on the Voss family, you'll need all your strength." As Laney climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the echoes of the evening, the music, the dancing, the threats, and the promises. Her blue dress carried the scents of barn dust and autumn air. Her feet ached from dancing. Her heart felt full and frightened in equal measure. But she'd stood tall tonight, in every sense, and for the first time since arriving in Granite Bluff. She believed she might actually build a life here, not the one she'd planned, but perhaps the one she needed. The first snow of the season had just begun to dust the mountains when the accident happened. Laney was working at her sewing table, squinting in the gray afternoon light, when she heard the commotion outside, horses whinnying in distress, men shouting, the sharp crack of splintering wood. She rushed to the window to see a wagon overturned in the street, its contents scattered across the muddy ground. But it was the sight of the familiar bay gelding, riderless and favoring its front leg, that made her heart stop. "Colt," she breathed, already reaching for her shawl. The scene outside was chaos. The wagon had apparently spooked at something, careening into the street. Colt lay motionless in the mud, his left leg bent at an unnatural angle. Blood seeped from a gash on his forehead. "Someone fetch Doc Brennan," a man shouted. Laney pushed through the gathering crowd, dropping to her knees beside Colt. His face was pale, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. "Don't move him," she said sharply when someone reached to lift him. "His leg, it might be broken. We need the doctor first." Mrs. Sutter appeared with blankets, and together they covered Colt, trying to keep him warm without jostling the injured leg. Laney found herself cradling his head in her lap, using her skirt to staunch the bleeding from his forehead. "What happened?" she asked the nearest witness. "Storm spooked the Hendricks' new colt," the man replied. "Broke free from the lead rope, ran right into traffic. Colt tried to catch it before it caused a wreck, but the wagon was already tipping." Dr. Brennan arrived within minutes that felt like hours. He was a competent man, trained back east before seeking his fortune in gold country. His examination was swift but thorough. "Broken leg, certainly, possible concussion. We need to get him inside." He looked around at the gathered men. "Carefully. Now, we'll need a door to carry him on." They transported Colt to the doctor's house, a small building that served as both home and clinic. Laney followed, ignoring the whispers about propriety. She waited in the front room while Dr. Brennan set the leg, Colt's occasional groans of pain making her wince. "He's lucky," the doctor said when he finally emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "Clean break. Should heal well if he stays off it. The head wound is superficial, though I'll want to watch for signs of concussion." "Can I see him?" Dr. Brennan raised an eyebrow. "Are you family?" Laney hesitated. What was she? "I'm a friend. A close friend." "Well, I suppose there's no harm. He's asking for you anyway. Keeps mumbling about keeping you safe from horses." The doctor's expression softened. "He'll need care these next weeks. I can't keep him here past tomorrow. I need the bed for real emergencies." Laney found Colt propped up in the narrow bed, his legs splinted and elevated. His eyes were clearer now, focused on her face as she entered. "Laney," his voice was rough. Is the colt all right? She almost laughed. You're lying here with a broken leg. And you're worried about the horse. It was just scared. Young things panic sometimes. He tried to shift and grimaced. Though I'm feeling pretty young and panicked myself right now. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. He reached out, and she took his hand without thinking. Just need some time to mend. Doc says 6 weeks if I'm careful. Where will you go? Your cabin is miles from town. I'll figure something out. Maybe one of the ranchers. He broke off, coughing. Lainey made a decision that surprised her even as she spoke. You'll come to Mrs. Sutter's. She has a room on the ground floor. Used to be a second parlor. You can't be climbing stairs or riding out to that cabin alone. Lainey, I can't ask. You're not asking, I'm telling. She squeezed his hand. You helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn. The next day was a whirlwind of arrangements. Mrs. Sutter, after some initial protest about propriety, agreed to the plan. Man saved you from those ruffians your first day, she conceded. Suppose we owe him Christian charity, but there'll be no sneaking between rooms. You hear? Lainey helped prepare the makeshift sick room, setting up a proper bed, arranging a table within reach, ensuring good light from the window. When they brought Colt from the doctor's house, she was ready with extra pillows and clean bandages. This is too much trouble, he protested as they settled him in. Hush, Mrs. Sutter commanded. You'll pay fair rent when you're able, and Lainey's already said she'll help with your care as part of her board. It's all perfectly proper and businesslike. But there was nothing businesslike about the way Lainey felt as she helped tend to him over the following days. She brought his meals, changed his bandages, read to him when the pain kept him awake. In the evenings, after finishing her sewing work, she'd sit with him, talking quietly or simply sharing comfortable silence. You're neglecting your customers, he said one evening as she mended by lamplight in his room. I'm managing Mrs. Morrison understands, and I can work just as well here as upstairs. She glanced at him over her sewing. Besides, you're terrible at resting. Someone needs to make sure you don't try to walk too soon. My mother would have liked you, he said suddenly. She valued capability over everything, said a woman who could turn her hand to whatever needed doing was worth more than all the silk dresses in San Francisco. Tell me about her. So he did, painting a picture of a woman who'd fled a bad marriage with 2 small children, who'd worked as a laundress and seamstress to keep them fed, who'd saved enough to buy a small plot of land where she raised chickens and grew vegetables. She died when I was 18, lung fever, but she'd already taught us everything important: how to work, how to judge character, how to treat people with respect regardless of their station. She sounds remarkable. I think you two would have understood each other. Word of Colt's injury and Lainey's care spread through town, creating new ripples in the social fabric. Some admired her Christian charity. Others, particularly those aligned with the Voss family, saw it as further proof of impropriety. First, she refuses a respectable offer of marriage. Now she's playing nursemaid to a hired hand. Margot Voss was heard to say at the Mercantile, "What next? I wonder." But support came from unexpected quarters. Ranch wives brought food, saying they remembered when Colt had helped during their own family crises. Mrs. Morrison increased Lainey's work, pointedly stating that a woman who tends the sick while maintaining her employment is exactly the kind of worker I trust. Even Milton, the clerk, stopped by with books from his personal collection. Figured you might need reading material, he said gruffly. Man goes stir-crazy lying abed with nothing to occupy his mind. As the days passed, a routine developed. Mornings. Lainey would check Colt's bandages and bring breakfast before settling into her sewing work. Afternoons often brought visitors ranchers discussing horse business, trying to keep Colt connected to his work. Evenings were quieter. Just the two of them as the boarding house settled for the night. It was during one such evening, 2 weeks into his convalescence, that Colt spoke the words that changed everything. "I need to tell you something," he said as Laney adjusted his pillows, "about why I really stopped those men that first day." She paused, hands still on the pillow. "What do you mean?" "I'd seen you at the stage office, getting directions, watched Voss size you up like livestock at auction, saw your face when you realized what kind of man he was." He met her eyes steadily. "I followed you, made sure I'd be there if you needed help." "You followed me. Not proud of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that you'd need a friend, someone who saw you as more than a transaction." He shifted carefully, favoring his healing leg. "My mother once said the measure of a man isn't in what he does when everyone's watching, but in the help he offers when no one would know." Laney sank into the chair beside his bed, processing this revelation. "So you've been watching out for me from the beginning?" "Not watching over. That implies you needed protection. More like watching for opportunities to help, if help was wanted." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out you're plenty capable of saving yourself, but I'm glad I could offer options." "The sewing work, the barn dance, all of it." "Just opening doors. You walked through them on your own." She was quiet for a long moment, emotions churning. "I don't know whether to be angry or grateful." "Be both, if you need, but know this: everything I've done has been because I saw something in you that first day. Strength, yes, but also grace. The way you held your head high even when that trunk must have been breaking your back. The dignity in how you spoke to Voss, even when he disappointed you." His voice dropped lower. "I've been half in love with you since that moment, Laney Arden, but I never wanted you to feel obligated. You've had enough of men trying to buy or bind you." The confession hung between them like morning mist, delicate and transforming. Laney found herself reaching for his hand, threading their fingers together. "You impossible man," she whispered. "I've been trying so hard to be practical, to not want things I couldn't have, and here you are, broken leg and all, making me hope for something I'd given up on." "What's that?" "Being chosen for who I am, not what I can provide. Being seen as whole, not as too much or too little, just enough." "You're more than enough, Laney. You're everything." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to their joined hands. We can't. You're hurt, dependent on my care. It wouldn't be right." "I know." His free hand came up to stroke her hair, gentle as he was with his horses. "I'm not asking for anything now. Just wanted you to know, in case you ever wondered, when I'm healed, when I'm back on my feet and you're under no obligation to tend me, then we can see what might be. And if I'm already sure," he was quiet for a moment, "then I'm the luckiest broken-legged fool in California." Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, Laney laughed, the sound filling the small room with warmth. Outside, snow had begun to fall in earnest, blanketing Granite Bluff in pristine white, but inside, by lamplight, two people who'd found each other against all odds sat in perfect understanding, hands clasped, hearts full of promise for what tomorrow might bring. The January town meeting was held in the Methodist Church, the only building large enough to accommodate the crowd. Laney sat with Mrs. Sutter and several other boarding house women, aware of the stares and whispers that followed her entrance. Colt, his leg finally healed enough to venture out with a cane, had insisted on attending despite her protests. "If they're going to discuss my future, I should be there," he'd said that morning, jaw set with determination. Now he sat with the ranchers near the back, his presence a quiet support she could feel across the room. The meeting had been called to address matters of town development, but everyone knew the real purpose Eldon Voss had proposals to make, and they likely involved expanding his control. Mayor Whitman, a nervous man who owed his position to mining money, called for order. "Gentlemen, ladies, we're here to discuss several pressing matters. Mr. Voss, you have the floor." Eldon rose from his front row seat, every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit, His eyes swept the room, pausing meaningfully on Laney before continuing. Friends, Granite Bluff stands at a crossroads. We can remain a small, struggling frontier town, or we can embrace progress and prosperity. He produced a rolled map, spreading it on the podium. I propose to invest in significant developments, a new hotel, expanded freight services, even a proper bank. But such investments require cooperation from our citizens. What kind of cooperation? Called out Hendricks. The rancher. Simply this, a unified vision for our town's future. That means supporting businesses that align with progress, not those that cling to outdated notions. His gaze fixed on Mrs. Morrison. Take, for instance, establishments that employ certain questionable individuals. Those who've shown they cannot be trusted to honor commitments. The implication was clear. Laney felt her spine straighten, but before she could speak, Mrs. Morrison stood. If you're referring to Miss Eldon Voss, then speak plainly. Don't hide behind innuendo like a coward. Gasps echoed through the church. Eldon's face darkened. Very well. I'll be direct. Miss Laney Arden came to this town under false pretenses, accepted my generosity, then spurned a respectable offer of marriage. She now lives in a manner that brings scandal to any establishment that employs her. That's a lie. The voice was Colt's, ringing clear despite his position at the back. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Miss Arden came here in good faith. You're the one who tried to change the terms of your agreement. Sit down. Riker, Eldon snapped. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't it? Colt moved forward slowly, each step deliberate despite his injury. Seems to me you're trying to run a good woman out of town because she wouldn't become your mistress. That concerns every decent person here. The church erupted in shocked murmurs. Mayor Whitman banged his gavel futilely. How dare you? Eldon started. I dare because it's true. Colt had reached the center aisle now. Ask anyone who's dealt with Miss Arden these past months. She pays her debts, does honest work, helps her neighbors. Can you say the same? Voss. I've brought prosperity to this town. You've brought gold, not the same thing. Laney stood then, her height giving her prominence in the crowded room. May I speak? The mayor looked helplessly between her and Eldon, then nodded. The floor recognizes Miss Arden. She walked to the front, feeling every eye upon her. When she turned to face the assembly, she saw the divide clearly mining families on one side, everyone else scattered throughout. But she also saw something else: respect in the eyes of those she'd sewn for, whose children she'd taught basic stitching, whose trust she'd earned through months of honest work. Mr. Voss speaks of broken commitments, she began, her voice carrying the strength she'd learned in factory floors and frontier struggles. Let me tell you about commitment. It's Mrs. Morrison, working 16-hour days to keep miners in decent clothes. It's Dr. Brennan, tending the sick regardless of their ability to pay. It's Colt Riker, breaking horses in all weather to keep our freight moving. She paused, meeting Eldon's furious gaze. It's not promising marriage while planning something else entirely. It's not using wealth as a weapon to punish those who won't bend to your will. You dare lecture me on morality? Eldon's composure cracked. You, who lived under the same roof as an unmarried man, who flaunts convention at every turn. I nursed an injured man with our landlady's supervision and the town's knowledge. If that's scandal, then Christian charity itself is scandalous. She turned to address the crowd. But this isn't really about propriety, is it? It's about power, Mr. Voss is angry that a woman said no to him, that I chose honest poverty over dishonest comfort. Honest poverty. Margot Voss stood from her seat. Is that what you call it? Let's discuss honesty. Miss Arden, the seamstress work you're so proud of, how long do you think it will last when the mining company stops allowing its employees to patronize businesses that employ you? A chill ran through the room. The threat was naked now, unvarnished. You'd punish innocent business owners to spite one woman. This from Mr. Palmer, the school teacher. That's your notion of progress. It's business, Eldon said coldly. Those who stand against development shouldn't benefit from it. Then I'll stand against it too, Mrs. Morrison moved to stand beside Laney. If employing the finest seamstress west of the Mississippi means losing mining business, so be it. Ranch families value skill over spite. One by one, others stood. Hendricks the rancher, Doctor, Brennan, the school teacher, even Milton, the clerk, who'd once mocked her, rose from his seat. This is ridiculous, Eldon sputtered. You'd all side with a fallen woman over the town's prosperity. Watch your tongue, Colt warned, his voice dangerous despite his physical limitation. The only thing fallen here is your mask of respectability. Enough, Mayor Whitman finally found his voice. This is a town meeting, not a trial. Mr. Voss, do you have actual proposals to present, or just threats? Eldon stood rigid, calculating. The room held its breath. My proposals stand, he said finally. Investment and progress for those who deserve it. As for the rest, his smile was thin. The winter is long. We'll see who's still standing come spring. He strode from the church, Margot and his supporters following. The remaining crowd burst into anxious conversation. Laney found herself surrounded by well-wishers and worried friends. Mrs. Morrison gripped her hands tightly. That was brave, girl. Maybe too brave. The Voss family doesn't make idle threats. Neither do I, Laney replied. I came here for a new life. I won't let him drive me out because it's not the life he planned for me. Colt had made his way to her side, his face drawn with the effort. You were magnificent, he said quietly. But Laney, he's right about winter. Things could get very hard. Then we'll face it together, she said, including the gathered supporters in her gaze. All of us who believe in honest work and fair dealing. That's what real community means, isn't it? Later, as they made their way back to the boarding house through streets already dusty with snow, Laney reflected on what had just happened. She'd come to Granite Bluff as one woman seeking security through marriage. Now she stood as part of something larger, a community defining itself not by wealth, but by values. You're quiet, Colt observed, matching her pace despite his cane. Thinking about how I came here ready to trade myself for safety, and now I've declared war on the richest man in town. She laughed softly. My parents would either be proud or horrified. Proud, Colt said with certainty. You stood for something today. Not many have that courage. I'm not alone in it. That's what surprised me most, all those people standing up. I've spent so long thinking I had to face everything by myself. He stopped walking, turning to face her in the swirling snow. You're not alone, Laney. Not anymore. Not ever again. If I have anything to say about it. The weight of the day's events, the confrontation, the threats, the unexpected support suddenly overwhelmed her. She swayed slightly, and Colt steadied her with his free arm. Come on, he said gently. Let's get inside. Mrs. Sutter will have tea, and we can plan for whatever comes next. As they climbed the boarding house steps, Laney looked back at the town spread below. Somewhere, Eldon Voss was plotting his revenge. The winter would indeed be long, and hardships would come. But she'd stood tall today. In every sense, she'd spoken truth to power, found allies in unexpected places, discovered that integrity could inspire others to courage. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it as the uncertain woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago. She was Laney Arden's seamstress, neighbor, friend, a woman who'd chosen difficult freedom over comfortable captivity. And despite the challenges ahead, she wouldn't trade that for all the red velvet dresses in Sacramento. You coming? Colt called from the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. Yes, she said, lifting her skirts to climb the last steps. I'm coming home. The knock came just after sunset, when the boarding house had settled into its evening quiet. Laney was in Colt's room, reading aloud from one of Milton's borrowed books while he worked on repairing a bridle. The domestic peace of the moment made the urgent rapping all the more jarring. "I'll get it." "Mrs." Sutter called from the hallway. They heard her open the door, then her sharp intake of breath. "Good heavens! What's happened?" Laney and Colt exchanged glances before she hurried to the door, Colt following more slowly with his cane. In the entrance stood young Tommy Hendricks, the rancher's son, snow-covered and breathless from hard riding. "It's Pa," the boy gasped. "Wagon went off the trail coming back from the mine. He's hurt bad. Ma sent me for the doctor, but he's out at the Jameson place. She said to ask Miss Laney to come. Said you helped before, with medicine and such." Of course. Laney was already reaching for her cloak. "Let me gather some supplies." "I'm coming too," Colt said. "You can barely walk." "I can ride, and Hendricks is my friend." His tone brooked no argument. Within minutes, they were mounted Laney on Mrs. Sutter's gentle mare, Colt grimacing as he swung onto his own horse despite his healing leg. Tommy led them through the darkening night, snow falling steadily. The Hendricks ranch lay 5 miles from town, but it felt like 50 in the storm. By the time they arrived, Laney's fingers were numb despite her gloves. Light blazed from every window of the ranch house, and they could hear voices raised in distress. Inside, they found chaos. Bill Hendricks lay on the kitchen table, his right arm bent at an awful angle, a gash across his scalp bleeding freely. His wife, Sarah, pressed a cloth to the wound while trying to keep him still. "Thank God," she breathed when she saw them. "He's been in and out of consciousness. I don't know what to do." Laney moved swiftly to the injured man's side, her months of helping doctor. Brennan, with Colt's injury, serving her well. "The arm's definitely broken. We need to stop this bleeding first." She began issuing calm instructions. "Tommy, bring clean cloths and hot water. Mrs. Hendricks, keep pressure there while I check for other injuries. Colt, can you help hold him still if he wakes?" They worked by lamplight, Laney's hands steady as she cleaned and bandaged the head wound. When Hendricks stirred and cried out, Colt held his shoulders, speaking in the same soothing tone he used with frightened horses. "Easy, Bill, you're home. Sarah's here. We've got you." The arm would need proper setting, but Laney fashioned a temporary splint to keep it stable. As she worked, she became aware of others arriving neighboring ranchers, drawn by word that spread faster than wildfire in the small community. "What can we do?" asked Sam Morrison, the general store owner's husband. "Pray the doctor comes soon," Sarah Hendricks said, "and thank God for friends who come in storms." It was nearly midnight when Dr. Brennan finally arrived, exhausted from his own emergency call. He examined Laney's work with approval. "You've done well, Miss Arden. Likely saved him from worse bleeding. I'll set the arm properly. But your splinting gave me a good foundation." As the doctor worked, Laney found herself in the Hendricks parlor with the other women, preparing food and coffee for the assembled neighbors. The kitchen was a makeshift surgery now, men's voices low as they assisted the doctor. "You've got healing hands," Mary Morrison observed, watching Laney efficiently slice bread. "Ever think of training proper? We could use a midwife out here, someone with medical knowledge." "I've only learned by necessity," Laney replied, but the idea planted itself in her mind. Sarah Hendricks gripped her hand. "Necessity or not, you came in a blizzard when we needed help. That's not something I'll forget." Near dawn, with Bill Hendricks resting peacefully and the storm finally breaking, the gathered neighbors began to disperse. Colt found Laney on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered mountains pink. "You were amazing tonight," he said, easing himself onto the bench beside her. Calm, competent, exactly what was needed. "I was terrified," she admitted, but there wasn't time for fear. That's what courage is, though not the absence of fear, but action despite it. He shifted closer, draping his coat around her shoulders. The Hendricks won't forget this. Neither will the others who saw you work. I didn't do it for their approval. I know. That's what makes it matter more. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world wake under its blanket of new snow. Lainey thought about the night, the urgent summons, the desperate ride, the work of healing. How different from the life she'd imagined when she'd answered Eldon's advertisement. I need to tell you something, Colt said suddenly, about my ranch. She turned to look at him, noting the serious set of his jaw. I've been thinking about selling it, with my leg, and the difficulties in town. He paused, choosing words carefully. There's good money in it, enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere the Voss name doesn't carry weight. You'd leave Granite Bluff. I'd go anywhere if it meant keeping you safe from Eldon's revenge. He met her eyes. I know you're not ready for declarations, but I need you to know if things get too hard here. We have options. You have options. Lainey felt something shift in her chest. And if I don't want to run, if I want to stay and fight for the life I'm building here, then I'll stand with you, broken leg and all. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Last night, when we were riding through that storm, I wasn't thinking about Eldon or threats or my reputation. I was thinking about neighbors who needed help, about being part of something bigger than my own struggles. Community, Colt said softly. Yes, real community, built on helping each other, not on who has the most gold. She straightened, decision crystallizing. I won't let Eldon Voss drive me from that. Not when I'm finally finding where I belong. Then we stay and fight. We stay and build something stronger than his money, deeper than his influence. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Inside the house, they could hear voices, Bill Hendricks asking for water, Sarah's relieved laughter, neighbors organizing care for the ranch while Bill recovered. I should go check on him, Lainey said, but didn't move immediately. Lainey Colt's voice was tentative. What you said about finding where you belong, does that include us, whatever we are? She turned to face him fully. This man who'd seen her worth from the beginning, who'd offered friendship without conditions and support without demands. Especially us, she said simply. Though I still think we should wait until you're fully healed before we name what this is. You deserve someone choosing you freely, not from gratitude or proximity. And you deserve someone who sees all of you, the seamstress and the healer, the woman who stands tall in town meetings and kneels beside the injured. He lifted her hand, pressed it briefly to his lips. I'm not going anywhere. Lainey Arden, however long it takes. A shout from inside broke the moment. Doctor Brennan calling for assistance. Lainey squeezed Colt's hand once before rising. Come on, she said. Our community needs us. As they went back inside together, Lainey felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was her community now. These people who came through blizzards for each other, who stood up to power when conscience demanded it, who saw worth in hard work and honest dealing. Eldon Voss had promised her gold and security. Instead, she'd found something he could never understand, a place where she could be fully herself, valued for what she could give rather than what could be taken from her. It wouldn't be easy. Winter still stretched ahead, with all its challenges and whatever revenge Eldon might plot. But surrounded by neighbors becoming friends, working beside a man who was becoming so much more, Lainey knew she'd already found her treasure. Not gold, but something far more precious, a life built on her own terms, a community that valued character over coin, and the promise of love that grew stronger with each passing day. The morning sun streamed through the windows, setting the snow outside to glittering like diamonds. But Lainey had learned to recognize true worth, and it had nothing to do with glitter. It was in Sarah Hendricks's grateful tears, in the neighbors who'd ridden through storms, in Colt's steady presence beside her. She was home. Spring came late to Granite Bluff that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought changes no one had anticipated. The snow melted to reveal not just the earth beneath, but new possibilities that had been germinating through the long winter months. Laney stood in the cabin's main room, her hand resting on the freshly sewn curtains she'd hung that morning. Colt's ranch house, their house now had been transformed over the past weeks from a bachelor's quarters into a proper home. Not fancy, but clean and welcoming, with touches that spoke of care and permanence. Almost ready, Colt appeared in the doorway, dressed in his best shirt, the one she'd mended so many months ago, now pressed and neat for the occasion. Almost. She smoothed her dress. A simple blue cotton she'd made herself. Nothing like the red velvet Eldon had tried to force upon her. "Are you sure about this?" He crossed to her, no trace of limp remaining from his injury. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The question is, are you?" Through the window, she could see their guests beginning to arrive. Mrs. Sutter in her Sunday best. The Hendricks family with Bill still favoring his mended arm. Mrs. Morrison and her husband. Dr. Brennan. Even Milton the clerk. The small gathering of people who'd become their true community. "When I came here," Laney said softly, "I thought I was trading my freedom for security. I never imagined I'd find both, and so much more. You found them because you refused to settle for less than you deserved." Colt took her hands in his. "You taught this whole town something about standing tall. Laney Arden." A knock at the door interrupted them. "That'll be Reverend Pike," Colt said. "Ready to become Laney Riker." She squeezed his hands. "I've been ready since the night you asked me properly." That had been just 2 weeks ago, in this very room. Colt had been working on breaking a young mare, and Laney had brought him lunch. They'd sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I have something to ask you," he'd said, producing a small wooden box. "It was my mother's. She'd want you to have it." Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth by years of hard work and honest love. "I can't offer you wealth like Voss promised," Colt had continued, "but I can offer you partnership, respect, a life built together, not bought and sold, if you'll have me." Laney had said yes before he'd even finished speaking. Now, as their friends gathered in the main room, Reverend Pike opened his worn Bible and began the simple ceremony. Laney barely heard the words, too focused on Colt's gray eyes, steady and sure as they'd been from the beginning. "Do you, Laney, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words came strong and clear. "Do you, Colt, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice carried the same certainty she'd heard when he'd first offered to help her find her way. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was brief, appropriate for the public setting, but it held promises of private moments to come. The small gathering erupted in congratulations, and suddenly Laney was surrounded by the women who'd become her friends, while the men clapped Colt on the back. "Never thought I'd see the day Colt Riker got married," Hendricks laughed. "Though if anyone could capture his attention, it'd be you, Mrs. Riker." Mrs. Riker. The name settled around her like a comfortable shawl. The celebration was simple cake that Mrs. Sutter had made, coffee and sandwiches, conversation that flowed as easily as the nearby stream. As the afternoon wore on, Laney found herself watching the gathering with a full heart. These people had stood by her when Eldon Voss tried to destroy her reputation. They'd become family in the truest sense. "No regrets?" Sarah Hendricks asked quietly, joining her by the window. "None," Laney replied. "Though I sometimes wonder what became of Mr. Voss. No one's seen him since he left for San Francisco in February." "Good riddance," Sarah said firmly. "Town's been better without his shadow over it. The mine's still operating, but with fairer management. And we've got you to thank for standing up to him, showing others it could be done." As evening approached and guests began to leave, each person took a moment to wish the couple well. "Dr. Brennan pressed a medical text into Laney's hands. "For your studies," he said. "This territory needs more healers." Mrs. Morrison promised more sewing work, though I expect you'll be busy with your own household now. Even Milton, transformed from bitter clerk to friend, offered awkward congratulations. You chose well, he told Colt. Both of you. Finally, only Mrs. Sutter remained. She embraced Laney tightly. You came to my door a stranger, afraid and alone. Look at you now. I couldn't have done it without you, Laney said, tears threatening. You gave me shelter when I needed it most. I gave you a room. You made it a home. You made this whole town better. Child, don't forget that. After she left, Colt and Laney stood alone in their house, the evening sun slanting through the windows she'd sewn curtains for, illuminating the life they'd built together. So, Mrs. Riker, Colt said, drawing her close. What now? Now, she smiled up at him. Now we live. We work. We build something lasting. Starting tonight. His voice dropped lower, intimate. Starting tonight, she agreed, feeling none of the fear she'd once associated with this moment. This wasn't a transaction or a trade. This was a choice, freely made, between equals who'd earned each other's trust and love. Later, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Colt held her with the same gentle strength he'd shown from the beginning. Was it what you expected? He asked softly. This night you once thought you'd have to trade for security. Laney turned in his arms, tracing the line of his jaw. It was nothing like I expected. It was so much more, because it wasn't about what I had to give up, but what we chose to share. You're worth more than gold. Laney Riker, always have been. I'm just glad you finally know it too. She kissed him then, slow and deep, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. She'd left Baltimore believing she had to sell pieces of herself for survival. Instead, she'd discovered her own worth, found a community that valued integrity over wealth, and gained a partner who saw her whole. I love you, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for waiting until I could choose you freely. I'd have waited forever, he replied, but I'm glad we didn't need that long. They talked quietly through the night, making plans. The ranch would expand. Colt had already gotten requests to train horses for the army fort being built nearby. Laney would continue her sewing, but also study with Dr. Brennan, preparing to serve as the area's midwife. Together, they'd build something neither could have managed alone. As dawn broke through their bedroom window, painting everything golden, Laney thought about the woman who'd arrived in Granite Bluff all those months ago. That woman had been willing to trade her first night for the promise of security, seeing herself as a commodity in a harsh world. This woman, Mrs. Colt Riker, seamstress, healer, friend. Wife knew her worth couldn't be bought or sold. It lived in the work of her hands, the strength of her spirit, the love she'd found with a man who'd seen her truly from the very beginning. No regrets, Colt asked, echoing Sarah's question from the day before. None, Laney said, meaning it completely. I came here looking for gold, in a way, but I found something so much more precious. What's that? She smiled, snuggling closer to her husband. Myself and you, and a life worth living on our own terms. Outside, Granite Bluff was waking up. Soon, there would be work to do, horses to train, clothes to mend, neighbors to help, a life to build. But for now, in the golden morning light of their first day as husband and wife, Laney Riker rested in the arms of the man who'd helped her discover that her worth had never been for sale. It had always been hers to give. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and finding one's true worth in the American Wild West. I hope Laney and Colt's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from. I'd love to know where in the world this tale of Granite Bluff is reaching. Your thoughts and reflections on the story mean everything to me. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of romance and adventure from the frontier. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of the Old West. Until our next adventure, partners.